long time ago about this topic. At first I thought, yeah, no problem. It's 2 months away. It's May, and no problem. And piece of cake. I got you covered. And about 3 weeks ago, when I started thinking about what I want to share with you tonight, I thought that's actually a little bit harder than I thought. This is actually a little bit more complicated, because whether I was Ruth Westheimer talking about sexual positions or just talking about relationships in general, it's something that's very serious. I think all of us take seriously. I know I take relationships seriously. I take my own. I take those that members of my community here. Oh, by the way, if you don't know, I'm one of the rabbis here at Bethel, just for the record. I've been here 7 years. I meant to say that in the beginning, just so it gives you context of who I am and why I spend a lot of time in this room, actually. And I hope all of you take relationships very seriously, and they should be taken seriously. So I thought, what on earth am I going to tell you guys? I'm not going to show movies. I'm not going to talk to you about specifics, right? If I needed that, I would have brought one of our teenagers in, quite frankly, from the community. They know a lot more than I do, I can tell you that right now. So what am I going to do? So what I have behind me is mostly really just talking points, and don't worry, it's only 2 pages. It's not that long. And what I'm going to do is talk for about 25, 30 minutes, give or take a few minutes. I'm not really watching my clock, other than just make sure I don't go till 9 o'clock. And then I'm here all night just to open up to comments or questions, whether it's in a public forum or you prefer to be in a private setting. I'm happy to do that as well. Maybe not tonight, but I'm happy to give my contact information. I'm happy to talk with anyone privately anytime. All right. So what I did think, or at least what I think is appropriate, is to at least give you a little bit of sense how I understand Judaism approaching physical intimacy, and why that's so important to our tradition, and why, if I stopped and asked everyone in the room to tell me something about Jewish law and physical intimacy, I guarantee you, each and every one of you would know something. I guarantee it, whether you know it or not. I can pry it out of you with the right questions. There are lots of rules and laws. Lots. Right? If you live in an ultra-Orthodox world, there's lots of rules and laws in that world. Right? As you know, men and women don't touch each other. If you're a married man, you cannot physically touch a woman. Not just talking about sexual intimacy. I'm talking about just walking by. I can't just walk by and hold your hand, whether we're married or not. It doesn't happen in that world. And there are lots of things that women need to go through and do before having sexual intimacy. And there's a great power in that. It might not be what I choose. I'm a conservative rabbi. I'm not an Orthodox rabbi. I'm not a Reform rabbi. I don't speak on behalf of those movements. I don't speak on behalf of mine. I speak on behalf of me and this community, and that is it. So what I will tell you tonight is what I think this Judaism should say, or does say. But if I was wearing a black hat, or I was a different denomination, you'd be hearing something very different. It's a synagogue behind me by about 500 feet, Orthodox synagogue. Go talk to that rabbi. He'll say something very different than me. And that's okay. That's fine. Go to 2 doctors, you get different opinions. Go to 2 rabbis, you get 30 opinions. That's fine. Not a problem. I can live with that. He's wrong, I'm right, but that's okay. Okay. All right. So I want to just kind of, as you can see, hopefully, I don't know if everyone can see over there, but I'm just going to read through it anyway. I want to just kind of talk through things that, as I said, I think are really important for concepts, to begin to put together a context of what is kosher sex. Because really what that meant to me when Aline was telling me, it took me literally 2 months to figure it out. Kosher sex to me is about, I'll give you my punchline, it's about the holiness of how we as human beings, through the lens of the Jewish tradition, because that's what I do for a living, how we approach relationships. Whether it is a committed relationship, whether it is a casual relationship, and I may make a comment about that later if I remember, whether it's just casual sex, you pick someone up at a bar, right, let's be honest, that happens in this world, or it's same-sex partners, or heterosexual, I don't care. However you engage in the relationship, that's what I kind of want to give context for. So I want to start with what I'm calling, I did, number 1, physical body. And as rabbis, we love to, I know it's in Hebrew, I promise I will translate. Sorry for those of you who don't read Hebrew, it's just the way I think sometimes. And I will translate that. All right? So a basic concept, the most basic concept about the Jewish body. Oh, what I want to say is, the reason why I think this is the way, let me rephrase. The reason why I approach tonight this way is because I don't think you can teach advanced math, geometry, algebra to anyone without teaching people multiplication, division, addition, right? I can't explain to my 7-year-old son complex formulas. He doesn't know 1 + 1 is 2, right? And I'm not saying that anyone in this room here doesn't know basic ideas. I just feel like you got to start with basic concepts of our tradition. And some of you will draw your own conclusions. I'm gonna draw one conclusion tonight. One only. That's it. And you'll draw your own conclusions as you walk out of this room. Or you'll comment what your conclusions are. Maybe different than mine, and that's fine. Okay. Concept number 1, very important, is here in the Hebrew, is B'Tselem Elohim. B'Tselem Elohim. What that is in English is, in other words, we're in the image of God. So Judaism teaches that each and every individual, Jewish or not, it does not matter, by the way, that each and every one of us are created in the image of God. And that's an important thing to remember. Because in our tradition, we also believe in the goodness of God, although things aren't always good in this world. I'm well aware of suffering, I'm well aware of horrible diseases. Believe me, I get it. I know it. But thank God it's not my talk tonight, so I can kind of get away from that for right now. Thank God you didn't give me that, Eileen, because I would have called you sick about an hour ago, right? Explaining, suffering in this world. I just can't. But because we believe in the goodness of God, we also believe that there's a purpose to all of God's work, that there is a real purpose to it. And the fact that we're all created in the image of God is the foundation of much of Jewish law of how you treat other people. Because we're all in the image of God, then we're equal. I don't care what color you are, I don't care what race you are, I don't care what religion you are. Judaism will teach again and again and again. Not perfectly. We are not the perfect religion, by the way. We have issues to deal with, a lot of them. But Judaism will teach there is a dignity and there is a respect in which you treat every single person. Whether it's just me saying hi to you, or you saying hi to me as we walk in this room, or if it's, back to the topic of tonight, a physical encounter. Talking about a sexual encounter, not a physical altercation. But that's the way everyone needs to be treated. So that's one idea. I now have a couple of quotes from the book of Genesis, the very, very beginning, which, according to our tradition, is an explanation of how God created the world. And you have a very powerful, powerful quote, which is V'hine tov ma'od, which means, literally, and here is, or this is, very good. Those are the 3 exact words. As you can see, I was good enough I looked it up to make sure I had it right. It's Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, if you want to look it up, but trust me, it's there. And at the exact description, let me rephrase that. Sorry, scratch that is what I meant. Immediately following the creation of human beings, God used these words, V'hine tov ma'od. In other words, there's something very good about the physical body inherently. And what I'll say is that the Jewish tradition not only understands these words as being very important, but holds them very dear when it comes to dealing with aspects, not just of the body, but of humanity itself. So we're all created in the image of God. You've got human beings are good, so there's a goodness to all of us. And then you have, why did I give that one? Hold on a second. Okay, fine. That's why I put that on there. All right. Then you have, doesn't come from the Bible. You have a beautiful saying, Nishmat Kochai, which means that somehow, like, everything living will praise God, or everything living has a reason kind of to be with God, and that is a prayer that is recited. Not the prayer. It's the beginning of a prayer, I should say. You know what that means literally? It means all living creatures basically end up praising God. Because I didn't give the rest of the quote, I apologize. It's a whole paragraph, actually. And it's a prayer, it's a blessing that our rabbis have written that praises the human body. Immediately following the creation story of human beings, day number 6, according to the Bible, you have this paragraph, starts with Vayachulu Hashamayim, And it's actually the paragraph that precedes on Friday night, the Kiddush. I'll come to that. The Kiddush, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the sanctification of Shabbat over a glass of wine. And the reason why I put this on there is because there's a beautiful connection here that I never noticed until maybe last week. Maybe I just never thought about it, which is actually probably more realistic. You have just gone through the creation story, at least two quotes, 1 and 3, quote, because in the beginning of Genesis, and now you have this idea of Hulu Hashemayim Va'aretz. It's the recitation on Friday night in traditional homes, acknowledging that after God created the world in 6 days, God decided to stop and rest. And God decided to kind of take a step back and see what God had just done. And that, by the way, on a different time for different talk, is what Shabbat is all about. It's a time to stop from the daily and take a step back and realize what you have to be grateful for, right? The Tov Ma'od, those things that are really good in your life. And our tradition argues that you can only do that when you take a step backwards. If you're constantly working, if you're constantly on your iPhone, if you're constantly emailing, if you're constantly Facebooking, if you're constantly tweeting, if you're constantly this and then that, how can you actually stop and really appreciate what you have? That's what Shabbat is in our traditions, to stop and appreciate. And there are many ways to understand that, and there are many ways to celebrate Shabbat. I don't believe it's just the way probably most people think, as the ultra-Orthodox do, or the Orthodox more traditionalists do. I actually don't believe that at all. But what I love about this paragraph, and the reason why I have it here, is helping to set up the context here. That we need to stop and pause and think about what is it exactly that our physical bodies can do, and how should we be using our physical bodies. All right? So that's the 4 ideas I just want to open up, I just want to present to you, and there are many more. And if we had hours or days, I would talk about many more, but these are the 4 I want to give you for right now. We're all created in the image of God. Therefore, all of us inherently are godly, our physical bodies. Again, doesn't matter what color, what race, what ethnicity, what your physical body looks like. Doesn't matter. We're all in the image of God, purely equal. God created human beings, said, this is really good. So there's inherent goodness, according to our tradition, other traditions as well, according to Judaism, about the physical body. We need to praise God, thanking God for our body. Right? The fact that I can walk, and most of us, I saw at least, walked in the way most people think, oh, I walked in, no problem. I mean, let's be honest, we probably take that for granted. And a lot of people can't just walk in the way we did. And you all know the people as well as I do. And then I did take a pause, and just really pause and realize how awesome our body is. All right, so I'm going to pause for 1 second, no pun intended, and just take a quick sip of water. But are there any comments or questions so far? So I'm going to make sure that if I need to repeat something, I will. Please, tell me your name.
Lemuel Cabrera.
Lemuel? Lemuel, great. Sorry, let me say, questions that are so far about this, because I will open up the questions and answers at the end, I promise.
Well, I'm just wondering about a definition of kosher.
Oh!
I know it with food, but I'm just wondering what in the world you're going to talk about.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks to us. I have no idea what I'm going to talk about tonight, actually. So, okay, I'm glad. You know what? That's a great question. So I should have probably started with that. Good question. Okay? So the word kosher, they don't know, well, I'm not going to do that because it'll take too long. Kosher is a word, it's a Hebrew word. I know we use it in English, or at least we spell it K-O-S-H-E-R. I get it. And I know we hear it a lot on the street. I know we see it and hear it on television. Got it. Kosher literally means fit for use. That's all that it means. And the context of food, which is most commonly used, that means there are certain foods that are fit for use, i.e. fit that I can shove in my mouth. Or not shove in my mouth, but politely eat, right? That's what it means. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. So the way I've defined, so thank you. The way I have defined kosher sex is not the physical part of it, but more what leads up to that. What leads up to the physical encounter? What should you be thinking about? Or more importantly, what does our tradition, the way I understand it, tell us we should be thinking about? That's the way I interpreted this topic. But literally it means fit for use. Those things that we can eat.
Sort of a subjective kosher?
In what context? Food or this?
The thoughts or feelings.
Again, what context? Talking about food or tonight's topic?
Tonight's topic. Like the
to find out more?
thoughts and emotions that you had before the physical act or not.
Yeah.
Kosher, sort of subjective.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. All right. The next just sort of idea that I want to bring out for us, because clearly the idea at some point will come up if we really fleshed out the idea of sex, right? One reason to have sexual intimacy, i.e. intercourse, is what our tradition calls in the Hebrew, peru or revu, which means to be fruitful and multiply. And that, by the way, is found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. Notice it's only 3 verses before God said, it's very good, by the way. So there's something about, inherently, whether you take it in context or out of context, there's something about fruitful and multiply that is good. Let's be honest about it, Jacob.
I've always had this question.
Yeah.
Made many jokes about it, but when it says be fruitful and multiply, so if you have a man and a woman, if they have 2 children, is that considered multiplying or simply replacing?
Great question.
So my concept is multiplying means adding.
Correct.
And not replacing.
Correct. That's a great question. And lucky for me, I happen to know the answer to it. I don't know it all the time as Chad will tell you, but this is what I do, which is a good bonus for me. So, I'm going to give it kind of a quick answer if you don't mind. So we just kind of keep going through. And that is that according to the strict letter of Jewish law, yes, to be fruitful and multiply would then require my wife and I to have 3 children. Because we're not adding to the world. Because one day my wife and I won't be here. And we will have, God willing, my children will outlive us. They will have, it's a zero-sum game there. So according to the very strict interpretation of that idea, Jewish law, you're supposed to have 3, so that you can increase.
I mean, or 3 or more.
Or more, yeah, sorry, minimally, is what I meant to say. Correct, absolutely. According to the strict interpretation of the law, absolutely. Right? But building on that, what I also wrote down here is that there are people who are infertile. We have members of our congregation. I happen to know them. We have a lot of doctors who do in vitro. I happen to know them quite well too. That's what they do for a living. Not everyone is able to have children. Let's also be honest, and here I'm not trying to get into politics, I'm just stating facts. Right? Want to know what I think about it? I'm happy to tell you. But I'm just trying to state basic facts. There are also a lot of same-sex couples. Well, last time I checked, no matter how loving those 2 people are, last time I checked, it was pretty difficult for 2 women or 2 men by themselves to procreate. Last time I checked. Right? And I'm not being funny, I'm actually being serious, because I'm actually in favor of same-sex marriages, by the way, but I'm actually being serious about that. So you have a problem there. And, obviously, the solution is there are surrogate mothers, there are adoption possibilities, so there are other ways for people to have children. And kind of building back on my answer to your really interesting question, it's actually a very good question. And that is, the rabbis have also interpreted this idea of be fruitful and multiply, which, by the way, is the first commandment in the Bible. The first one. It's not number 27 or 540 out of 613 or hidden in the middle of something else. It is number 1. Be fruitful and multiply, which gives you an idea of how important children are in our tradition. Which is why most holidays, by the way, are about children. Passover is about children. It's not about adults, just for the record. The rabbis are very clear. It's about engaging our children. Because obviously, they're our future. Right? Okay. So, I wrote infertility just to kind of prompt me to make the statement that there are a lot of, what I'll say, untraditional families. And by that I mean, that's actually a bad word. But there are people who are not able to have, for lots of reasons. Right? And there are some people who aren't married. And they don't have children. And that's fine. So the point of that is that there are a lot of, I only did 2 here, but there are a lot of different scenarios why people don't have children. Just as much as the first commandment, and a very common one that many people know, is be fruitful and multiply. Not everyone can. Not everyone can. And all I'll say about that is that it would be my hope and my dream, but sometimes my hopes and my dreams don't always align, that we live in a world that is sensitive to everything that I didn't write down here. Right? That would be sensitive to same-sex couples, that would be more sensitive to single parents, mothers, men or women, I know both, that decide to adopt for whatever reason, or have children on their own. You guys can figure out the math on how that gets done. Blah, 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 blah. Or just decide to adopt because they want to adopt. All right, any comments or questions so far? Related to this, two things. Rocket, okay, great. I love it, all right? So here, basically, I'll just line you up. I'm trying to set up the idea that there's something, and I'll use the word you'll see on the next page, something kind of obviously intrinsically holy about our bodies. And here, you have the concept of the importance our tradition places on being fruitful and multiply. And regardless of whether that's through injections in vitro, which by the way is expensive and very painful, if anyone knows about it or has ever tried it. Not that that should be a deterrent. When I have a child, believe me, having children is very painful, believe me. On the checking accounts, on the stress, believe me. But it's worth it, a lot of fun. But here you're going to talk about sort of what, I mean, let's be honest, kosher sex or not kosher sex, how do you have children? Well, lots of different ways, but there's one pretty traditional way that's been going on for thousands of years. Okay? All right. So that's just the idea of procreation, one reason why people have sex. All right. All right. Sorry, all right. Now I want to get a little bit more into, well, I'll say a little bit of the meat of kind of what I want to share with you tonight. And this is really going to, I'd say, is the, I guess it's the meat of what I want to say. All right. So this is back in the first two quotes from the book of Genesis, the same exact verse. The first one is, in Hebrew, it's Lo Tov Adam Heyot Levado. Okay, that comes from the book of Genesis. You're nodding, so I guess you understand it. And that loosely or not so loosely means God is saying, at least in the Bible, the Torah, the book of Genesis, it says, man, human being, should not be alone. It's actually stronger than that. Lo Tov is not good. It's actually not good to be alone. So, back to kind of your comment, going back to the traditional world, is that in the traditional world, I don't live in the traditional world, by the way. And I said when I use the word traditional, what I mean is traditional mainstream Judaism for the last 2,500, 3,000 years, which is called Orthodox Judaism today, because the movement I belong to, the conservative movement, is around maybe 150 years. And the Reform movement, okay, we'll give them 175 years. Probably being generous, by the way. But 150, 175, 130, whatever the number is, when you compare that to Jewish history of easily 4,000 years, Abraham was about 1800 BCE, let's round up and call it 4,000 years, 150 years isn't even a blip on the, on the screen. So when I say traditional, I don't mean better or worse, I just mean until about 150 years ago, what did everyone think? And what everyone thought was not good for a human being, and specifically because the way the language is written, Hebrew works like Spanish and other languages that you can have. I think Spanish, I could be wrong, so correct me. But I think, if I remember back to a long time ago when I took Spanish, Hebrew works masculine and feminine, not unlike English. So you've got to kind of match it up. So the language is Adam, which is man, or human being. Hi, come on in. No welcome. No, excuse me, no problem, you're welcome. They understand that as literally as it's not good for a man to be alone, so that a man has to find a wife. All right? But again, I just want to go back to whatever I said here about the infertility thing, that also could mean that you should be taking same-sex partner, find a lover. I don't care what it looks like, I don't care what they look like, I don't care. Not my place to judge. And hopefully not anyone else's to judge. But you shouldn't be alone. And they're setting up, ultimately, that in order to get to the sex part of the kosher sex, right, here's the foundation of what our tradition wants you to have. Juxtapose that, just to be very crude, and kind of spark you for a second. Juxtapose that to the one-night stand in a bar. Go have a couple of drinks. Go pick someone up. Believe me, be careful how I say that. It's not that hard to do, if you really want to do it. It's really not. It's really not. A couple of drinks, a lot of things can happen. Maybe no drinks, a lot of things can happen. But what our tradition is asking for is not to be alone. Here's a very interesting line, which I argue with my wife all the time, is the Torah also tells us, when you choose someone, you should be finding an ezer kenegdo. Ezer literally means, from the word Ezra, helper. Kenegdo means literally opposite you or against you. That explains all my arguments with my wife. You are against me. It says it in the Torah. Your job is to be against me. If I say it's blue, your job is to say it's white. And that explains all the arguments I have with my wife. But actually what I would say is that to be in a companion, I wrote companionship, but I probably should have used a stronger word, relationship, or whatever the word is, it doesn't really matter. But what I think the importance of that is, and what I teach those couples I work with in premarital counseling, which is, as you probably can tell by now with me, is just premarital joking around, is that what you really want to find, this is the model of someone that you want to be with, and when the model is not someone against you. I obviously misinterpret that for my wife on purpose. First of all, she's fluent in Hebrew because she's Israeli, so she knows I'm making it up, and she corrects me on it. But what that really means is, when someone is opposite you, thank you. Right. You want someone to compliment you. I want my partner to make me better. I want my wife to push me to the best Avi I can be. And hopefully vice versa. That's the idea our tradition sets up in relationships. To push you, to make you better. The last, and it's not, by the way, well, I'll come to that in a moment. The last concept of companionship, or really should be relationships, committed, I hope, or not committed, however you want to interpret that, is the word re'im ha'ahuvim, which actually comes from the Sheva Brachot, 7 blessings that are conferred upon a bride and groom on their wedding day. And re'im ha'ahuvim actually means loving friends. That's what it means. That you are setting up a relationship of mutual respect, that you're setting up a relationship where you're considering the other, just trying to keep an eye on time so we don't go crazy, where you set up a relationship where you're caring for the other person's needs, both, by the way, physical and non-physical. So I will parenthetically break for a moment, and I was hoping not to go there, but I brought it up, so I only have myself to blame. The rabbis talk a lot, there's a lot of interesting discussion, or some people find it interesting, about the requirements according to Jewish law of physical intimacy between a husband and a wife, by the way. Yes, the rabbis talked about it. Yes, the rabbis understood physical intimacy. Yes. And yes, the rabbis dictate in mainstream Judaism, or all Judaism, historically, that you need to have physical pleasure between husband and wife. And actually, there can be a divorce if that's not happening. And if you ever want to know what that document is called a ketubah, which is a marriage license in Hebrew, what that's all about, well, it's not exactly about this. Well, it's about re'im ha'ahuvim. It's about loving partnership. Not exactly about my wife didn't please me physically, so therefore I have to get divorced. It's not what it's about. Or my husband didn't please me, vice versa, by the way. But it does detail what happens if that's not being done. It's very interesting. Go ahead. Is it lemuel? Lemuel, right?
I heard that goes as far as how much...
What's the it? Just so I know.
The last one you're talking about.
Loving partners? Yeah.
That it goes as far as how much work the husband is doing, which allows for...
Yes, it does. It does. It does. How do you know that?
I can't remember who that said.
No, that's really interesting. It's interesting. See, I told you. Everyone knows something about the tradition, whether you're Jewish or not, and you just kind of pull it up and you've heard it. Yes, it does. If you're a salesman and you're a traveling salesman, obviously your requirements are less because you're not around as much, but yeah. Yeah, and actually, because you got me started on it, and here we go, I'm going to keep my mouth shut after this, I promise, is that Rambam actually wrote a lot about it. Rambam is the acronym for the great Rabbi Maimonides, and Maimonides was a doctor. He happened to be a rabbi, but his profession was a doctor. And he wrote a lot about sexual intimacy, actually. So yes, that is true what you're saying. Okay. Any other, just this, and I'm going to kind of talk about these three things and quickly wrap it up and open up for comments, discussions, and whatever you want to talk about. Anything else about it? Okay. Well, it's not a surprise that I'm quoting these three things to tell you what I understand the tradition to be saying about it. But I am going to, I think, maybe surprise you a little bit when I get to my final ending. And I want to give you three more ideas to ponder. As it says, hey, ideas to ponder. Go figure. All right? I'm actually going to start with number 3. All right? Hilui Arayot. What it literally means is revealing your nakedness. Literally. Literally what it means. And in the Torah and in the rabbinic interpretation, it talks about not revealing your nakedness. It tells you who you can't reveal it to. And the rabbis expand it to be sexual relationships with them as well. And it's pretty explanatory. No incest. I don't know what that is. There's one more written down, I think. Binding on it. Thinking of what the second one, the obvious one was. It'll come to me later. But it's the rabbinic interpretation for not just, although it literally means not to uncover your naked, not to be naked in front of these people, but it's the euphemism for relationships that illicit relationships. Okay? Which again includes family members and things like that, obviously incest. Another idea that maybe some people have heard of is called sniut in Hebrew, which is number 2. I'm going backwards. Which is modesty. In traditional world, when you said the word sniut, and I say traditional, again I'm talking about the Orthodox world, sneus probably, something over there, right? When you hear sniut, what you're talking about is the way people dress, generally. So modesty in the religious Orthodox world means the way people dress. Women, modesty for the woman in the Orthodox world is covering up skin. You'll never see, ever, an Orthodox woman walking around with her sleeves up like this, or her skirt up to her knees, up to her elbows. You'll never see it, ever. Just won't. So there is a sense of, and I'm not picking on them, actually. There's something very beautiful about that. Sorry? No, go ahead. That's all right. Sure? Good. All right. The reason why I brought this up is because it's a really important concept, whether you practice that or not. I wear t-shirts. My wife does too. My wife wears shorts. That's something I practice. I'm just telling you honestly. But the reason why this is important, I think the Orthodox really have it right, is because it sets up a concept that we're not trying to use people's body, right? We're not trying to use it. I'm not trying to use the body like Madison Avenue does, to sell it, to sell things. I'm not. That's why they cover up their body. It's a sense of modesty. It's not because of any other reason. They're not trying to use the body. You don't want to gawk at the body for just looking at a physical beauty. Because when you do, you've lost the point of what you're looking at. You're all looking at me because I'm the one standing here talking, and you might see, I don't even know what color these are, but dark pants and a tan sweater. Well, that's all you see, then something's wrong. What I hope you see is my soul. That's my essence. It's not what I'm wearing. It wouldn't matter if I was 6 feet tall, 300 pounds, 20 pounds, 4 feet tall, and everything in between. It doesn't matter. The essence is the soul, is the person. And the idea of modesty is to help cover up, but ultimately to reveal the essence of a person. That's what it's about. Lastly, and this to me is what, going back to your comment, this to me really is what kosher sex is all about. It's about setting up a place, a space of kedusha. Kedusha is the Hebrew word for holy, holiness. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is Well, first of all, what is holy in our tradition? Let's start with that, right? You corrected me, you were right. I should start off with defining what I'm trying to talk about, so I appreciate that. So then I'll backstep and say, what does it mean to be holy? So, on one hand, our tradition, what it means to be holy, very simply, is Judaism tries to elevate the mundane experience to something holy. I can't use the same word when we're trying to define it, right? To something non-mundane, or maybe more appropriately stated, to take the general average thing of a day, whether it's eating, or back to the first page, that blessing that's about thanking God for our bodies, whatever it might be. Judaism tries to take the things that we take for granted and elevate it to a spiritual level. That's what it means to be holy. The things you and I might take for granted, walking, going to the bathroom, we take for granted. You know, there's a prayer that you recite after you leave the restroom, thanking God for your body working the way it does, because not everyone can. It's a beautiful part of our tradition, a beautiful part. So on one hand, that's what holiness means. Holiness is just about elevating, and it's about making everything meaningful. But I think to this context, I think holiness has a much deeper meaning. And I think it has something more profound to say, which goes back to mixing up the metaphors of the word kosher. Right, I talked about, sorry, just really quickly, how, right, because you asked the question, right, kosher's fit. And it's obviously when you hear kosher, you think food. You don't think sex. You don't think sports. You think food. That's the association. And what I think about food, and in terms of the word kosher, and also about sexuality when it comes to the word holiness, is that what it tries to do is to put a little bit of discipline, I will say, into our lives. So I'll explain that in a moment. I'll let them know second. What did he just say? Is he out of his mind? I am, but I didn't mean what I said. Okay? What I'm talking about is that I believe, you can argue with me that I'm wrong, but I believe with all my heart that we live in a society where people take, not just things for granted, but we live in a society, putting that aside for me, we live in a society with instant gratification. Right? I remember as a child, yes, I remember, every Friday after school, I had to drive with my father in the car, and we would have to go down to the bank, and he'd have to stand online, and we'd have to go withdraw money that the family would have for the week. There were no ATMs. Those didn't exist. There were no credit cards. I mean, there were credit cards, but I didn't use credit cards as much when I was growing up. Everything is instant. Fast food, cell phones, email, Twitter, Facebook. By the way, they're going to make a bloody fortune tomorrow morning, by the way, those guys, and those women as well. But it's all instant. And I think what the holiness and all about kosher sex is about is to try and find just a little bit of discipline for a very important part of our life. So to be very crude for a moment and to end with this, and just open up the comments, that is, I'm not blind, I'm not stupid, I am not unaware of what's happening in the world today, and I'm part of that world. So I'm not standing here trying to preach that I'm better than anyone else. I know people go to bars, people meet at events, and people want to have casual sex. Great, have a good time. Enjoy it. I'm serious, enjoy it. I was in college too, I was part of that world too, all that fun stuff. Enjoy it, I'm just telling you, have a good time. What I want you to think about though, not about instant satisfaction or gratification, because that ultimately is what one night stand is all about. It's not the liquor talking, it's about just instant physical gratification. What I want you to think about, and I only want you to decide for yourselves, not me, not your partner, not any religion you're a part of, is do you want your relationships going back to, and your physical encounters, going to the idea of kosher sex, saying it straight. Do you want it to be about, right, do you want it to be about expressing your love for someone physically, which is an important part of a relationship? Do you want it to be sometimes it'd be so committed, but do you want it to be an act of love, that you care about that person? In other words, is it meaningful to you? Or is it just a random act? It's just something that you want to do because you feel like having sex that night. And if you do, that's fine. That's a natural human urge. But what I would encourage you to think about is, how do you move to a place, when you want that natural urge, how do you move to a place of having it be a part of something bigger, something more meaningful, something more special? And if you can do that, and it's not easy, it's not, but if you can do that, or if you have it a little bit in your mind, then maybe you can get to a place of kedusha. Maybe you can get to a place of holiness. And that's what relationships are about. Making another person a better person, making them happy. And part of that, and a very important part of that, is about physical intimacy. That's what I think. So I ask you, when you think about your relationships, the next physical encounter, whenever it is, where do you want to be on the scale? You want to be just something you're going to throw away that doesn't mean anything to you, so that you become the opposite of what tradition says about sniyut? You're just an object? Or you're trying to find it in a place, ideally, maybe I'm living in an ideal world, maybe I'm not realistic, but are you moving towards the place of loving partners who want to please each other, both spiritually and physically? That's what needs to be on your minds when you're thinking about what Judaism says about kosher sex. So that's been my formal presentation, but now I'm open to any comments, questions, or disagreements, or anything Aline wants to plant.
Well,
any questions? Aline?
Well, I had a question. Well, I didn't know if you were going to cover it, so I will. Didn't, so I'm going to ask it. So we always, in prepping for tonight, and people asking us lots of questions and interesting things. One question that kept coming up was if you were going to talk about sex and Shabbat and why people consider it a mitzvah to have sex on Shabbat or conceive on Shabbat and where that comes from.
Okay. So, first commandment. Sorry, right? So, first commandment to pru, right? To be fruitful, multiply. And without getting into great detail right now, not that important, and just don't want to go into it, to be honest with you. But I did say before, in traditional worlds, there are guidelines of when you're allowed to have physical intimacy with your partner, i.e., when in a traditional world, if a woman is menstruating, then you do not have sexual relationship with that person. There's a period of time that you need to wait after the menstruation period, and then the woman needs to immerse in a mikveh, and then let the fun begin, so to speak, right? Just trying to say it quickly. So the reason I say that is because, to answer your question, the mitzvah of the commandment of being fruitful, multiply is not time-bound. It's not that it's better on Monday or Tuesday or Shabbat. It's just not. The ideal is to have children, and our tradition could care less if it was at 3 a.m. on a Monday night or for a Saturday at 2 after the boring rabbi's sermon. They don't care. They don't care. But I don't know exactly where it started from, and I'm sure it's somewhere in rabbinic writing, because I've heard lots of stupid things, that it's better somehow to be on Shabbat. I'm sure it is. But it doesn't make that child any more special, that unit any more special, other than, where I'm sure where it comes from, is that, again, going back to the idea of Shabbat, wherever I talked about this number 4, that Shabbat is a time to step back and appreciate what you have. And one of the things that you do when you appreciate those things you have, so for me, I work in the mornings obviously, but there is nothing in this world when I get home from working Saturday that stops me from being with my 2 kids and my wife. Nothing. Not a party, not a telephone call, not an email, because I don't look at my phone anyway. Nothing. So I take a step back and appreciate what I have that way. And one way you appreciate what you have, again, kind of the theme of the discussion is on Shabbat to have this, sexual relationships. And yes, I've heard it too. I'm kind of being sarcastic before when I said, rabbis say dumb things, but yeah, there is this notion that on Shabbat, for some reason, it's better or more special and precious. You go tell that to the family that can't conceive. You tell them, don't do it on Shabbat, let's see if it works out. You tell them. You look them in the eye and tell them. When they say, I can have a child. Oh, I must not be doing it right. Well, it wasn't Shabbat. They don't want to hear that. People don't want to hear that. So I've heard it, I know it, but I think we need to steer people away from those kinds of concepts that are, I'll say baba mice. I mean, really, to me it's a baba mice. It's not that important. The ideal is to be in a committed relationship, have physical pleasure and intimacy with someone you care about, and ultimately, if your goal is to multiply, I'd say, I don't know, 2 in the afternoon, 5 in the morning, I don't care. Have a good time. You know, yeah.
Define mitzvah.
Oh.
I thought it was a good deed for somebody or something.
Well, no, that's another sort of twist on things. So, literally, a mitzvah means commandment. It means commandment. We translate it erroneously. Let me rephrase that. It often gets translated, I'll still use the word, erroneously, as good deed, but it is not necessarily by definition a good deed. And I know that because one of the commandments and one of the mitzvahs, but there's 613 in the Bible, talk about sacrifices. Now, many of the commandments happen to be good deeds, because a lot of what we do is how you interact with other people, right? Don't kill, that's a pretty good deed. Don't steal, I think that's pretty good. Honor your mother and father, I'll keep it up there as pretty good. Not bad, right? Don't covet your neighbor, don't have incest, don't sleep with people that you shouldn't be sleeping with. Not connected to the talk tonight, by the way, just, married people, don't have affairs. I think those are good deeds. But by definition, there are 613 commandments, mitzvot, and they're commandments, which means you shall do something or you shall not do something. And they don't always have to be a good deed, like help someone across the street or give up your seat or things like that. Does that help you understand the commandment? But it does get translated often as a good deed.
So that's where the confusion comes from, as sex on a particular day being what's the mitzvah connection? A good deed, a better deed, or
because in a traditional, sorry, I'm putting out Hebrew, which you probably don't read.
No.
So, sorry. No, you don't? Why not? You didn't become fluent for this talk, right? So, what I'm putting at number 1 for me is be fruitful and multiply. So the commandment is be fruitful and multiply. That's the commandment. Because in Judaism, in traditional Judaism, right, in mainstream Judaism, the idea of sexual intercourse is be fruitful and multiply. That's what it's for. So that, which I was thinking, so that, okay, I had to go there. Just remember, you started it. Remember that, you started it, right? The idea is for procreation, which is why, to me, it was number 2 of things I wanted to talk about. So that, according to mainstream Judaism, masturbation, particularly for men, is against Jewish law. Because the spilling of seed that is not directly for a commandment of being fruitful and multiplying is a violation, because it was potential human life.
so it's the opposite of a mitzvah.
I don't know, a lot of ways to describe it. I'm not sure I would describe it that way. However, I don't know if it's the opposite of a mitzvah, but maybe, arguably. John?
Yeah, so what did Jewish texts say about interfaith relationships? And then how's it then,
So,
I guess the second part is, like, how's it end up getting interpreted by the different denominations?
okay, great question. So the question is, who won the ball game tonight? What was that?
Yeah. Not the Padres.
Not the Padres? Yeah. What else is new, right? Wait, so let's make sure I hear the question. So the question is, what does our tradition say about interfaith marriages? And then how do the different denominations approach that? Interpretations. Which will be, okay, all right, good. So, let's think about how to answer that. I know the answer, so I gotta figure out how I'm gonna answer it right now. Okay, I think I got it. I can't link to this anymore. Be fruitful, multiply. Yay!
Wouldn't work.
Okay. So again, I'm just speaking historically for our tradition, and then I'm speaking about what I think. Okay? So, starters, historically, 3 strikes, you're out. Right? I mean, the rabbis knew from intermarriage. I say rabbis, not like the rabbis of our tradition from thousands of years ago, 2,000, 1,500 years ago, which is the basis of our Jewish law today. I'm sure intermarriage happened 2,000 years ago. It happened. It had to have. It's absolutely possible that it did. I'm sure. However, simply stated, the rabbis did everything they could, the tradition did everything they could to try and stop it. They just did. They just did. I'm sure you've all seen the jazz singer, right? He'll die to marry someone who's not Jewish, and his father goes through mourning ritual as if his child had died. His child is getting married, but he's treating him as if he died. He rips his clothing, which is a sign of losing someone. Very powerful movie. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Jazz singer? Okay, right? And so that basically describes right there what the tradition thinks about it. Thank God, right? Thank God that there are, I'm so used to being like Vanna White, I swear. Thank God there are other ways of interpretation now. So other denominations who feel differently. So one thing to keep in mind is that depending on